welcome to this interview about the integration of artificial intelligence in our daily lives. In recent years, we have witnessed an explosion of artificial intelligence technologies with applications in a wide range of fields, from healthcare and industry to personal convenience. However, with this growth comes a series of questions and concerns. How can artificial intelligence be used ethically and responsibly? How can it be ensured that its benefits are distributed fairly? And perhaps most importantly, what implications could there be of artificial intelligence surpassing human intelligence? In this interview, we are kindly joined by Andrew Okukura, a fourth-year master's student studying physics at Oxford, who will discuss these issues and many more, seeking to gain a broader perspective and a better understanding of the role that artificial intelligence can play in our future, as well as talking a little bit about himself and his experience in Romania. Andrew, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Glad to have you here. Before we jump into the heavy hitters, I want to talk a bit about you because you have a fascinating history. You being a Japanese citizen, but also have lived in Romania. What could you say have been like the biggest cultural and social differences that you've noticed compared to back home, if you consider Japan back home?
I actually do consider Romania as being back home for the most part, mostly due to me having lived most of my life in Romania. Although I have lived in Japan quite a few years as well, and I have gone through about 2 years of school there, so I have a pretty decent idea what is happening there, although I've never lived properly as an adult in Japan in the short span I have been, or I could be considered an adult. So again, this perspective is a bit different, but I can still give you, well, at least an idea. So the whole thing is, I've been in the UK as well for the past few years, and from what I have seen in the UK is a combination of some things from Japan and some things from Romania. So it's somewhere in the middle. I've been to other places as well, and I have seen that for the most part, I can take some things from Japan and some others from Romania. If I combine them, it gets close enough to what that place felt like. So what I can at least say is that Japan and Romania are polar opposites. One society is incredibly orderly and very tradition-based to the point where if stepping out of the line, or rather stepping out of those those social rules will earn you some weird looks at the very least, and that's the best case scenario. While it's in the other one, it's all near anarchic in a way, to the point where people don't care about rules, they only care about the people, close to them, kind of like a clan-based place. I mean, it's not exactly clan-based, but it's kind of how others in Western Europe would describe our society. We care more about our family and our close friends, and then everyone else is just a stranger, and we only we can only trust them if they're in debt to us, or if how should I say this, they're still one of our friends, or they become our friends. So it's just how it works around there, and these are very polar opposites. It's such a shock for whoever goes from Romania to Japan or Japan to Romania. I've met Japanese people who are living in Romania right now. They actually work at the laser facility in Bucharest, the place I have told you about when we first met. And Romanians living in Japan, and they told me that that's how they feel as well about, this being such a contrast between the two. So obviously, when I was younger, it was very difficult for me to adapt from one to the other, because obviously, having grown up in both, and especially when I was younger, I would be staying about half of my time in Japan, half of my time in Romania. I would obviously struggle adapting from one to the other. It took me a very long while to get used to it. Even I'd say as a teenager, I struggled with it to an extent. Because I had a very, how should I say, sometimes like I felt like rules were just to be followed, and then immediately my Romanian way of thinking would kick in and be like, are they really? Are those rules? If those rules don't make any sense, do I have to follow them? It's just like this. It's this whole maze of things, which in the end, after a lot of time, I've finally gotten around to you know, being able to be proficient in both ways of living. It's just that, and it's really helpful. It's just that getting to this point was a very difficult journey in a lot of ways. And I can explain to you for what reasons.
No, yeah,
Next.
I want to say I can imagine, but I cannot. There are no two countries in my mind more polarly opposite. But you did mention the familial structure as being very important. This is something that's very important in both cultures, if I'm
Yes,
not
but in a
mistaken,
very different
in a
way.
different way. Yeah.
In Japan, it's like the core from which everything, like it's the only place where those rules don't matter as much, if you know what I mean. While it's in Romania, is the place where is the only place where you can trust other people, if you know what I mean, fully, like without absolutely any drawbacks. Well,
Yes.
that's in an ideal picture, because obviously there are exceptions in everything, and well,
Sure. Okay.
I can definitely define exceptions in both exceptions that I know personally. But it's just how things worked, at least for a very long time in both societies, until at least recently.
What was a big culture shock? Did you have, is there a particular habit or tradition that we do in Romania that was a big shock to you? Like maybe just one, so when you moved from Japan to Romania,
I
like
would say
crossing the
that
street on a red light, or
personally, because I'm much closer to my mom, who's Romanian, I've had a much more Romanian view of things when I was younger, in a way. Obviously, my mom's influence being there. So usually my shock was bigger when going from Romania to Japan than the other way around.
okay.
So for example, in Japan, I'll give you a few examples. They have all sorts of taboos when and I'll give this very mundane example. If you stick your chopsticks in rice, that means you're commemorating someone's passing or recent passing, or someone who's been dead for a while. You're commemorating their life. And the thing is, if you do that without doing that, it's considered to be very disrespectful. It's a very strange thing. It's a very minute detail people don't think about, but this is what
Yeah.
Japanese culture is in a nutshell. A lot of like small rules which added on top. It's like doing a delicate dance every time if you don't already know it. It's just that kids there grow up in that, and not only they grow up in that, but even the school they go to and the extracurricular activities they do, they enforce those rules as well, in a direct or indirect manner, depending on how it's structured. Like, I'll give you an example here. About school, because that's my personal experience. So in Japan, at least in the primary school I went to, we would have lunch after the first few hours in the morning, but the lunch, although it was cooked by the school kitchen, it was served by the students, and there was a rotating ensemble. Like every week, there would be a group of 4 to 6 students in our classroom serving the food, a different one every time, and it would be in rotation. And then afterwards, we would have to clean a certain area of school, but and we would be assigned to a team, and the team that would be made out of different classes out of the whole school. It was meant to build cohesion, and also depending on the year of study. For example, if you're younger, you would be the one mopping the floors. If you're older, you'd be brooming, and if you were, in your second to final or final year of primary school, or 5th or 6th grade, you would be leading or co-leading teams with other people and coordinating the cleaning for everyone else.
That's
Sometimes
fascinating. And
sometimes
cost
even
efficient.
teachers would be involved in that as well. It's just that they would be involved in coordinating whenever there would be a student which would, I guess, they wouldn't see as a good leader. Like that would happen as well. So it would depend, but for the most part, it was meant to build cohesion and also cleaning up the classrooms.
That's
And by the
very
way,
clever.
this extends all the way even into your job in Japan. People, even though they work a lot more hours, like in terms of, you've heard the death from overwork phenomenon in Japan. The thing is, most of the time in which they do extra work, they don't necessarily do their job, but rather, I don't know, clean the office, clean the toilets. That's actually part of their job as well, which is, so you can see it extends all the way even while doing your job. It's one of the reasons why I wouldn't find it very enjoyable, because I don't think that someone who's supposed to do very complicated work. I mean, obviously, you should keep your desk clean. You should keep your personal space clean.
Sure.
But I don't think it should be your job to clean up everyone else's. That's kind of the whole.
That's a bit extreme.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues Japan has at the moment. This kind of schedule being a bit grueling.
So if you had to switch, if you had to pick, let's keep it one to one. If you had to pick one social challenge that Romania has and one social challenge that Japan has, what would you pick, and why do you think they're the most pressing in your mind, based on your experience in both countries?
I would say that in Japan, the issue is having many social challenges, but them being much smaller in nature, but combined, they create this big monolith, which you have to face. And for example, this conforming to rules, very strict conformation to rules in Japan, that's not necessarily a big problem, because in the end, once you adapt to it, it works out fine. It's just that it's very harsh. So that would be one thing I'd pick from Japan. From Romania, I would say the distinct lack of rules would be, and that is the big problem, because you don't know what to expect. It's always unpredictable, and it takes you a very long while to get used to it. And even when you get used to it, it still surprises you every day. But again, with the correct mentality, you can thrive a lot more in, at least from my viewpoint, in the Romanian side than in the Japanese side.
Yeah, that the chaos keeps you young, you know.
Well, or it gets you very old very quickly.
Yeah, two sides of the coin. You know, ride the wave or don't. Now, as mentioned, you're studying physics at Oxford. You're in your 4th year now. And I wanted to see, do you have any connections between your field of study and the development of artificial intelligence? And how do you find it useful in your line of study?
So I sadly don't have a lot of connections to the computer science department or the mathematics department, because that's where pretty much all of that research is done. I know a few PhD students who are somewhat related to those fields of study, and I have talked to them. And for the most part, that from almost all of them have told me, you know, on one hand, AI is exciting, but it shouldn't be seen as the solution for everything. That's and I completely agree, because that's my personal experience as well. Like in my field of study, it's useful whenever you have a lot of data with relatively small errors and you want to obtain a certain, how should I say, a certain fit, for example, right? Like you want to see a certain pattern. AI can recognize that pattern for you and give it to you, serve it to you, as long as you're feeding good parameters as well. And you don't have a certain bias in your data as well, because that's also very important. This is another issue as well. Like, for example, if you pick a certain, let's say, certain galaxies with, let's say, certain properties, it's a very specific example, because this is my project. In my master's project involves this, studying a bunch of galaxies and then finding out their evolution through a bunch of programs. I'm not using AI because I have a very small sample to work with, so that's one of the limitations. I have thought of this, but let's say you pick a bunch of galaxies from the sky, and you just, let's say you want to prove the fact that, I don't know, certain wavelengths give you like certain intensities or whatever, like with size, or a certain relationship between mass and luminosity and so on. Obviously, you've already kind of, if you choose only a certain kind of galaxy, I don't know, a certain shape or from a certain distance and so on, that's a bias which might ruin your data, because you're going to get something which might either make sense, or it's completely different from what it might even make sense of, if you know what I mean, because you haven't taken in everything. Again, it's a lot more complicated describing this, you know, because it's case by case basis, and for the most part, I haven't had an occasion where AI was very useful. Some of the people in years below me doing the same course told me that they were able to get some help with their homework using ChatGPT. But
Oh yeah.
personally,
Well,
I found it, because of how ambiguous the problems I had in my own problem sets, because of how ambiguously they were formulated, ChatGPT was quite useless. So I had to
no,
kind of,
sure.
I had to do it on my own pretty much. So
Right.
there's, AI has evolved a lot in the past 5 to 10 years. It's just that it will take a lot longer because, again, the more data you fill in and the more, how should I say, well thought out you choose and put in, because obviously you cannot put in junk either, the better you're going to make that AI be. It's kind of like, training someone by
Yeah.
showing them pictures, telling them what those are, and you tell them enough times, or you tell them enough show them enough objects, and they'll start to be able to make coherent sentences, kind of thing. It's kind of like
Right.
doing that to a child as well. Same thing with
Yeah.
AI, right? That's what neural networks are. You just add pieces and pieces, and it starts connecting with everything else they already have. So
And so then by that logic, we already know that AI is been used both for personal commodity and on an industrial scale. What do you think are the most positive ways that AI has impacted our daily lives so far? I can think of chatbots just off the top of my head for banking services. Do you think like traffic systems being automated by an AI, an algorithm, could be
I
beneficial?
mean, in terms of AI, it's just part of automation. I mean, your personal assistant technically is an AI, even though it's not exactly a very smart one from
No,
everyone's
yeah.
experiences. That's also technically an AI if you think of it, because it's meant to, well, it's taken inputs and inputs and inputs, and then, well, with an initial set of inputs and outputs it was given, and a bunch of parameters and so on, it slowly but surely got better and better. But I mean, there's a lot of limitations with that because, well, we might have very complex questions or tasks to give, and that's not exactly easy to get into an AI.
Sure.
I guess a positive thing would be the image recognition. Like all of those softwares using image recognition, they're very useful, not only for consumer-based things. Like, for example, you have an image and you just want to search, what is that, right? Like, that's the simplest thing you can do with it. But also all the image recognition, everything, which obviously has a very big downside as well, because it can be used by, for example, authoritarian governments to, the facial recognitions, the smart spyware, and whatever else. But this also comes with a positive, that you're able to do all sorts of interesting things with it, even in science. Like, I would say, if I want to put in let's say I have 2 projects, or I don't know, I have a bunch of pictures I've taken of the sky, I think there's definitely a way to make an AI which would be able to match it with another telescope or another region. Although, again, as long as you have enough tools, you should be able to get the data, or at least the coordinates of the galaxy on the sky yourself, and then you should be able to fill that in. So overall, it's like, I don't know how to say this, but I see AI as, and this is another thing, AI can be used for good things and bad things at the same time. Like, you can make it do a certain task, and then depending on what you want the outcome to be, it can be a very good thing, for humanity as a whole, or for whoever you want to help, or a very bad thing, as you've seen, like image recognition being used for 2 very different case studies, like either even in science or used for, well, surveilling people. So that would be another thing.
And on that note as well, what industries, if you had to be speculative, what industries do you think have benefited the most from AI integration?
definitely the ones which work with the internet in general. Like you see Google, right? The search engine, YouTube's algorithm, whatever, or social media algorithms. All of those are technically AI, and they recommend us a lot of stuff. It's made things a lot easier because they no longer have to do some really complicated studies. It's just like, yeah, this looks popular. I guess the AI will figure it out if we give it a bunch of parameters, like the ones which bring us the maximum revenue, i.e. the maximum number of ads served to you. So that's just how it works for now. Like that's where I would say those companies benefited the most, but there's definitely many other use cases, but it gets quite technical from there. It depends from case to case. Like it's difficult for me to articulate some of the examples I've given because I would need to think of a particular case or someone to give me, I don't know, a particular scenario, and then I would be able to judge if AI fits in or not. Because again, you have to have
let's go with just off the top of my head, shipping, international shipping. Everything from logistics to delivery, from order to delivery.
So in terms of logistics using AI, so on one hand, you could use AI to predict which would be the fastest way to go through. For example, if AI could analyze with enough input data, you need a lot of input data, you would be able to average to get the average time a package spends in a certain area. And then obviously, even through conventional methods, you could quite easily calculate how much it takes for it to travel a certain distance by whichever method they're using. And I guess you could combine it with some sort of grid, which the AI could estimate, like, for example, all of the amount of time each segment takes. But then again, I would see this being done iteratively as well, just literally doing that statistically. And using that without AI. So on one hand, AI could be used, but on the other, I don't know if it would bring an improvement to.
Okay, so it's still.
Yeah, a lot of the cases are ambiguous. It depends how you configure that AI, and without me having more knowledge about the industry in general and whatever problems there usually are, it's difficult for me to estimate. Like.
So then let's go on some hypotheticals. I have a question here that, now correct me if I'm wrong, also ties to a distinctly Japanese phenomenon, which Japan, from the way we see it and in the news, has a very high, first of all, it managed to industrialize in 10 years what the country's hundreds of years to do, or 100 years to do. And then now that they've consistently, since the 90s, have been automating a lot of jobs and using robots to replace the workforce. This is the kind of quantum leap that a lot of the rest of the world is now doing, or is now really investing in. And I want to see from your hypothetical point of view, do you think that AI integration will eventually lead to the replacement of many human jobs? And if so, how do you think society should prepare for this?
I think that AI will replace a lot of jobs which have relatively simple inputs and outputs. Like the less parameters you could think a certain job or activity would have, the easier it would be for that to be automated. Like, for example, one which takes a lot of speech, even though nowadays it seems like AI is able to deal with that too, but not only speech, but also emotion or anything, something humans intrinsically have, but cannot really explain themselves. As I said, emotions are one, feelings another, and all sorts of complex ways we behave. Any job which includes that would be quite difficult to replace.
Sure.
Like some people would say, and there are some, how should I say, fringe cases, for example, in some people would say that we could replace doctors. It's a bit difficult to do because being able to see how someone is hurt in a way or someone is ill in a certain way might give you a clue. Again, I'm not a medic. I wasn't very good at biology anyways when I was younger. So, but from just what I could think of, some of those fringe cases you'd rather leave alone, but some of the others, like for example, I mean, already we are using GPSs, right? And a lot of those give you algorithms to, and a lot of the GPSs nowadays were trained, I think, with AI to be able to give you the not only the shortest path, but the path which takes you the least amount of time. So that would be an example of, for example, maps no longer being very useful, right? Like you just have AI giving you all the directions anyways. You don't have to figure them out yourself anymore. So that's an activity which was automated. It didn't really replace any jobs, at least any jobs I could think of. But definitely you could make a lot of things like driving technology also very well. You could automate that. The only issue, I guess, is automating certain jobs, which, you know, if they go wrong, like for example, as I've given before, self-driving or autonomous driving, the outcome is that someone gets hurt or dies in an accident. So this is also another aspect of AI, is that if you replace it in that spot, especially in a job where people's lives are at stake, if something goes wrong, do you want to put an AI there? Because again, even the best AI sometimes cannot judge some very fringe situations which you might have not parameterized. Because each problem or issue you might face, we are adaptable and we always have, like, we can always introduce in ourselves new parameters in a way. But with AI, as long as you don't recompile it and then introduce the same data again after making an update and adding more parameters or changing or radically changing how that certain AI program works, you're going to be stuck with all the imperfections and all of the problems of, for example, fringe cases not working. So it's a bit difficult, again, a bit difficult to judge. But I do think that AI will make not necessarily entire jobs obsolete, but rather certain activities much easier. But then again, we've already seen some automation, for example, butlers and warehouse workers being automated by robots instead. Because at least in that case, you have to organize in a certain place. And already, if you look at it, for example, for a warehouse worker, you have each and every area numbered, categorized, and so on. So that makes it a lot easier for AI to put an AI there, because it's already something quite organized and there's no human interaction involved, at least not in a fundamental way. So you could definitely take that out of the equation and just put a robot with AI to do the job. And same with the butler to an extent, because as long as you can automate speech recognition and everything related to that, you should be able to make a responsive waiter or butler, whatever you want to call him, and for him or her to be replaced with a robot which will be able to serve you food and drinks and possibly even tell a few jokes. You know, you could program in jokes, or it's just that, again, human interaction exists, and from a certain point you can still feel you're interacting with a robot. And it might get a bit stale once you go enough times. In Japan, some restaurants have already automated, like they have a smaller number of waiters and waitresses, and instead they have robots serving you the food. But they haven't fully replaced them either, because they have realized that having some humans to be there to interact is still important. It's just
Yeah.
that serving the food and, well, maybe even picking up some of the used plates and so on, that can be done by a robot, and
Yeah,
that
the
would
heavy
make things
lifting.
easier.
Yeah. Mhm.
So you can already see there is a certain pattern in AI. Usually when it's something you can categorize and then give a certain number, associate something with it directly, like objectively, that's when AI thrives. But whenever human interaction or just anything which is not exact is put in, you
Yeah.
immediately have a lot of problems. And there have been attempts, as you've seen with ChatGPT,
Mm.
I'd say they've done a pretty good job, at least from what I have seen,
Yes, it's been trained very well. It's
but the thing is, if you write ambiguous enough sentences, which sometimes happens,
mhm.
ChatGPT breaks down. I've had a lot of occasions in that when I was searching for all sorts of mathematical and physical concepts,
Mhm.
and it gave me a completely bullshit answer. Like it was completely unusable, and I just laughed and just moved on and did it found the answer myself. So
There is
there's still
that famous
limitations.
video, if you've seen it, of the man who forcefully, like after like 20 or 30 questions, he forces ChatGPT to admit that 2 + 2 = 5,
Yeah,
even though you've seen that one.
yeah,
And then he's like,
I've
good job,
seen the
man.
whole thing, and some other people were able to force ChatGPT to say other stuff as well. Like, for example, that the sum of 1 to infinity of all natural numbers is -1/12, which is a joke. Which is a joke in complex analysis.
Mm.
It's the zeta function, I think, Riemann function. But then again, it was quite funny seeing that after enough questions, you get a bullshit answer. We're getting back to the same place, right?
Mm.
The whole idea of AI is that as long as you have good data and enough of it, it will do really well. But you can
Mhm.
already see anything which we cannot characterize ourselves exactly. Like, I don't know, why do we feel happy? Why do we feel sad? Those very simple questions, right?
Mhm.
If we cannot characterize that, we have no way of giving good data to the AI, and then the AI just doesn't know what to do, or just has a mental breakdown. It just gives you completely stupid answers.
Yeah, yeah, it can
So
happen.
this is kind of the fundamental idea. It's just, and it's also why I don't think AI will replace anything, because
Mhm.
AI will always be one step behind us, because as long we can understand things, or rather said feel things, without actually being able to characterize them, we just do it intuitively, and that's something
Mhm.
the AI cannot do. It has to have some data, it has to have some parameters, and it will give you something in return. And
Mhm.
even smart AI, as people call it, still create the same kind of model. It's just that the parameters and input data is no longer, how should I say, decided fully by us. But then again, it
Mhm.
gets complicated again. But in my opinion, I don't think AI will ever be better than what we can do. If some other, I don't know, let's say there's some kind of alien species or whatever, which
Mhm.
is much more advanced than us, then maybe their AI will be better than us as humans.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's just you just never know.
Mhm.
But
Absolutely.
I mean, you just never. I mean, not that you never know. Sorry, that's just what I mean is, if something like that happened, then that would be possible. But if it's made by us, most likely it won't be as good as us.
Mhm. Yeah, it would
Unless
be a massive human error.
someone comes up with, I don't know, some kind of idea he can explain but cannot feel or do himself, which is kind of a strange concept to think about,
Yeah, quite
or
frankly.
philosophically speaking. But
Mhm.
I don't see that happening. So
Okay. Well, I want to lead because I like the role that we're on, and I'd like to lead to one of the final questions that I have. That um, we kind of have to suspend disbelief here, although not that much, and kind of go into maybe the realm of science fiction for a second. Um, so, do you believe, in a hypothetical scenario, that AI has the potential to surpass human intelligence in the near future? And if so, what implications realistically would they have for our society? And I don't think it would be like Skynet level, obviously, but that's just my personal opinion. What do you think, Andrew?
Intelligence is a very complicated thing to describe. It's not only just being, for example, having a good having a good capacity to process, for example, logical operations, right? Having very good logical thinking. It's not on that. That's just a very small part of our intelligence. So we can definitely make AI, which are better at us for certain tasks. As I've said, ones which you can give good input data and a lot of it. I definitely think, for example, stuff like logical reasoning or pattern recognition, those things you could make AI better than any human. But for many other things, such as I said before, things we cannot characterize ourselves very well, we cannot make an AI better than us because we don't understand how we work ourselves. Sure. Yes, in some ways you can make AI better than us, but in some others you cannot. But if you want to make a proper, let's say, artificial intelligence as you see in science fiction, that's artificial intelligence is being portrayed as a sentient human being, which is ascending to a point where it can do more than any other human. And that's not possible because we're much more than just being able to do math calculations or being able to see that two pictures are similar or they're the same thing or not the same thing.
There was a scientific term for that event, not a singularity. What was it? It was
a singularity is something completely different.
Yeah, I figured. It's when the technology reached like the apex of its existence.
I cannot remember that term. I think I know what you're referring to, but
yeah, I think I had it wrong. But so then our readers, we can go to sleep comfortably knowing that.
Again, I'm not an expert in it. I'm not an expert in AI, so don't take my word for what it is. I just take it from someone who might be a more, I guess, sophisticated consumer, because I have tried to implement AI for some of my own projects. It's just that I haven't really seen any improvement. For the most part, the results I usually got were worse. So because of those two principles I've given before, if you have good data, lots of it, and you can describe the data with a certain number of parameters, and you know which parameters they are, then yeah, you can definitely put it all in and it will be good. But if you cannot, then don't use AI. So that's just how I see things. It's just AI is not the do it all, but it is definitely a tool which can make our lives better.
Absolutely. I'd like to close with that also on a lighter note, because we don't want to end on doomsday theories here. So like the internet democratized the access to internet, do you now think that AI like ChatGPT or Adobe's AI that they're using now, and Bing's AI as well, and multiple other consumer available AIs, do you think they're democratizing access to the wealth of human intelligence that is out there?
Well, this is another question with a complicated answer, because in theory it should. If you take let's say take 1,000 random people with very different very different views, very different backgrounds, very different levels of education, very different fields of education. If you take completely random people, let's say just as a thought experiment, yes, you're going to have a democratization, because you can then see what the other 999 people have contributed, right? To what and to what extent. The issue is that people who use such tools might be biased towards a certain kind of thinking, or might have a certain kind of education. Some might be maliciously introducing data with a certain bias, or even unaware, like without being aware, they might be introducing data with bias. So we should be aware of that as well. Like, for example, have you seen all of those experiments with chatbots like a few years ago?
Yeah,
I think
AI
Microsoft,
and stuff
yeah,
like that.
AI just, I think that was a Microsoft one, right? The one
Yes,
Microsoft
yes.
made. Yeah, that one went really badly because the bias was that a lot of the people in the community were out there to just kind of have fun and mess around with the AI and make it say
Hmm.
stupid shit. And because, well,
Yeah.
the AI wasn't well configured, it started after 24 hours, it started to say some really unpleasant stuff,
Some
which I don't think should be mentioned
spicy
here.
things, yeah.
Spicy would be an understatement. It would be
Yeah,
controversial to the point where any real human who would say that would be completely ostracized.
yeah, yeah. That was I really hope, and I'm sure that the fellows over at OpenAI learned from the AI.
Yeah, I mean, all of those experiments, though, all of those failures will help AI improve in general, the field, because you can then see, like, yeah, well, look at the bias some people or a certain group of people might have, and they might
Mm,
introduce to our AI. If we're going to ask them, we have to be prepared to counter that bias and
mm,
to be able to pinpoint that bias and eliminate it in our data if needed, and then
mm.
introduce another parameter for that, and so on. So you can see
Sure.
it's kind of a improving it by getting more and more data.
Hmm.
Sometimes the AI doesn't improve by itself. Sometimes the AI just cannot do that. So we have to improve it and then do it again and again.
Sure. So, on an optimistic note, do you feel good about AI and our future relationship with it?
I feel like we I feel like AI is a good thing, but we should be cautious for what we're using it for, because again, if you have a, an activity, as I've said before, where someone's life would be at risk if something goes wrong, or things which we cannot describe accurately ourselves because we don't have enough knowledge about, for example, our brain, right? That's
Hmm.
one of the reasons why we cannot describe our behavior very well. And even now, there's a lot of research being done. We don't have a clue what's going on. We have to be cautious about those situations and, not apply AI absolutely everywhere, but only where you have the three things which I have mentioned before: good data, lots of data, and easily describable in a way, or you can
Hmm.
associate a finite number of parameters to it and be able to think that, hey, that makes all of that makes sense. And then if you can do that, then AI works. But if not, then you should stay away from it and do that activity yourself rather.
Fair enough.
So we
Fair
should
enough.
cautiously look at AI as another tool in the toolbox, not as the do-it-all.
Yeah, not the Swiss Army knife, but just the wrench. Yeah. Um, Andrew, this has been a really fascinating interview about the impact and implications of integrating AI into our daily lives. I want to discuss both
Thank you
positive.
for the opportunity to discuss this as well. As
No,
much
of
as
course.
I'm personally not an expert, I would say that a lot of the hype about the AI isn't justified, about it being able to do everything. But we
Hmm.
should also not dismiss it either as another fad or another, well,
Sure.
another trend. It's just an extra tool and just another thing we can say contributes to, well, our evolution in well, the evolution of science in general.
Hmm.
So it's quite nice to see that, to be able to talk and, well, give a kind of in the middle, or at least in the middle perspective. And
Hmm.
if you would like, I can try and talk to some of my friends who might have a lot more of a clue of what's going on in AI compared to me.
Oh, we'd love a follow-up, of course. Absolutely. Everyone's always welcome. But again, it's a big issue that we're trying to decipher from multiple points of view. We've
Yeah, and there's a
had
lot of
different
ethics involved as well, and some of it, I think, pretty well justified.
perspectives.
Although, and we shouldn't be looking at science fiction for answers, although we should be looking at that as the worst of worst case scenarios.
Yeah. No Skynet. No, thank you.
But rather we should think about what we'll do with this. It's kind of how I remember there was I think there was an ethical aspect to, for example, it's like talking about a lot of other ethical aspects. For example, assisted suicide. Like, can you trust that person that they are responsible enough to be able to decide that they should take their own life? Kind of the same thing here. Can you trust AI that it is responsible enough, and also the people who've made it, that they're responsible enough, that they're not here to screw anyone over, or that they're competent enough not to do so? Yeah. So it's the same exact thing, you know. Is this worth it? Does this open up a rabbit hole? So and I'll leave up to the ethicists to talk about that, because personally, I'm not qualified enough to talk about it.
No, that's perfectly fine, Andrew. But you do raise a question that I hope we'll be able to address in the future, and it's really one that I think fundamentally we've overlooked. Is it worth it? And I think with that in mind, it's been a very, very thorough interview, and really thank you, Andrew, for the time that you've given us, and given us a lot better insight into what is the ethereal being of AI. And we thank you for your time and your expertise.
Thank you for your time as well, for taking this interview.
Vă mulțumim că ne-ați urmărit, sperăm că v-a fost de folos și vă invităm în comunitatea noastră a Societății Omului Sănătos.